it's really a pleasure to welcome you all here today to the Bionic Being session. My name is Melanie Subin. I'm the Managing Director of the Future Today Institute, which is a strategic foresight advisory firm that works with businesses globally. The session today is on the Transcending Collaboration track, which is really appropriate because we're going to be discussing in this panel wearable devices and how they're going to change the very nature of how we live and what we do. Today I have three very distinguished speakers with me. I'd like to give them a moment to introduce themselves, and then we'll dive into the content. Can I start with you, Paolo?
Yeah, I start. I'm Paolo Dario. I'm Chief Scientist at the Dubai Future Lab, but in my other life, I'm a professor at the Scuola Superiore Sant'Anna in Pisa, Italy. And my main interest has been for many years biorobotics and bionics. So I'm very glad to contribute to this discussion exactly on bionics. Thank you.
My name is Paweł Śpiwoda. I'm a founder and director of Neurotechnology, which is a brain health policy hub. Previously, I was Director General of the Human Brain Project until August and CEO of eBrains, an infrastructure for brain studies. I also work a lot on governance of neurotechnology, and in particular the International Center for Future Generations, a new think tank which was established in Brussels in September.
Hi everyone, so this is Ken here from Singapore. I run These Abilities, which is an inclusive innovation agency, and what we do is we work with organizations, companies, governments on how to design or redesign inclusive products, services, environments, campaigns and policies. So much like how we look towards nature with biomimicry to inform the technology around us, I help companies and organizations look towards disability to enhance delightful lived experiences for everyone.
Thank you, Ken. So I imagine that the vast majority of us own some kind of wearable, whether it's a smartwatch or maybe even a ring. But for the purposes of today's conversation, we really want to broaden perspectives on what wearables are and how they might affect us. So can we begin by maybe defining wearables for the purposes of this conversation? Paolo, maybe you can go first.
Yeah, maybe I can start. I like to put together wearable with the concept of companions, because many devices, including our cell phones, are sort of companions and are wearable mostly. So maybe we can think of 4 different categories of companions. Some of them are wearable, some are not. Actually, the first one is not even wearable, but is ingestible. There is an emerging category of robots or devices that we swallow, that can either move in our gut, let's say, or stay inside and become our invisible companions. Then there are other companions that are bionic limbs, for example. I've seen a few people here around wearing very elegantly bionic arms or bionic legs. Those are part of us. They are wearable in another sense. Then wearable in the strict sense. That is really something that you can put on, becoming also actuators, not only sensing devices like the exoskeletons. And finally, another category of companions, which are the ones outside us, which will collaborate with us. They are not wearable, but are, in a broad sense, companions.
Thank you. And I think that's such a good tie-in. So, Pavel, a lot of your work has focused on healthcare-related and wellness-related wearable devices and related sensors. How would you define wearables for this conversation?
Yes, so Paolo offered an excellent taxonomy of wearables. My interest is primarily in the purpose-driven wearables, and this is a hugely impactful emerging field. And let me give you 3 examples. I think some of the most stark situations are those of emergencies. And in emergencies, there are lots of new wearables that are being developed. A Portuguese team at INESC developed a textile band that gives you the picture of all vital signals which are necessary for the clinician to analyze and read. So oximeter, ECG, everything is integrated and translated into early biomarkers. So whenever an emergency team arrives, there could be a spot-on analysis of the situation. Another example which I find very impactful is a combination of a wearable and a robot that is able to detect falls at home. And falls are a major issue for older people. 1/4 of people after the age of 65 suffer from a fall. 1/5 of those falls end up with an injury. In the United States, 3 million people ended up in emergency rooms as a result. So what this device does is it is a combination of body sensors and ambient sensors working together with the robot that can, transfer the information very quickly and enable the analysis of the seriousness of the fall. And then there are a lot of diagnostic wearables that are emerging, which are super impactful in various conditions which imply mobility impairments. For example, in Parkinson's disease, being able to offer a clinical score on the basis of instant analysis is extremely important, and this is what wearables can do. So there is a lot to say about these, I would call them purpose-driven wearables.
Thank you so much. And Ken, a lot of your work is focused on, why are the wearables that we see scaled today the ones that we've chosen to adopt? So for this conversation, what are the wearables that you're thinking about?
Yeah, I guess when I look at wearables, for me, first and foremost, it needs to serve an assistive function, right? I think if, let's say, we not look at today, but let's say 50, 80 years ago, things like our watches, our shoes, and everything else were considered new technologies, wearables of sorts, right? And why is it that those have persisted through time and that we're still wearing them today and they weren't rejected by society, right? For me, I think when we look at certain wearables, I mean, a classic example might be the Google Glass they tried to release in, I think, was it 2008 or 12, right? And why is that not more of a thing now? Through Google, Snapchat, Bose, and then even now onto Meta, it struggled, right, to cross the uncanny valley. And that's something that I think we need to ponder about. Is it because the uncanny valley is just too deep? Is there also ways in which if we were to consider the adoption of certain wearables and assistive technology for the collective good, that uncanny valley can be less deep and we can increase the adoption as well, much like how we did with, the COVID vaccines as well.
So that's a great segue into why haven't we seen certain wearables scale as much as maybe we thought that they would? Watches, fitness trackers, nearly everybody has those today. But there are many other types of wearables that maybe we have not seen scale. You gave the example of smart glasses. So Paolo, can we again start with you? What do you think are the reasons that some of these wearables aren't catching on? Were initial thoughts too overly ambitious? Or is there something else holding us up?
Well, first of all, performance. Everybody would buy something that works well, I think, because this is something we have to have it clear, the difference between a research idea and the real technology. So watches, smartphones, tablets, even glasses, imposed them as something usable because they do something really useful. But the second point, phase, we should think about the cost. But I would say more than that is the acceptability, because it's very same definition of wearable. So for example, fashion. We are working with educational agencies about fashion high-tech. Some people like high-tech in fashion. Some people prefer natural everything, let's say. So there is sometimes a perception that is psychological about this. So wearing something that in fact is also generating maybe different ways of perceiving the world, or perceiving ourselves. Till what is one of the key words we want to address, the sixth sense. But we will discuss later about that. So this is probably the main reason why it's not scaling. But I can anticipate that in some areas, for example, in the field of working, making work less painful or less difficult is an area in which wearable and exoskeleton in particular are catching up. And the market there, we're talking about $1 billion of market. This could be the first to be introduced, and the first field to introduce exoskeletons.
So you brought up comfort and how to wear devices. Pavel, you've done a lot of work in that space. What do you think about adoption and what might be holding us up?
There is better and better adoption. In fact, when we look at the figures, there were 1.1 billion connected wearable devices in 2022. This is an increase from 600 million 2 years earlier. Makes me think of Moore's Law. It's a broad metaphor, but nevertheless, there has been a doubling in 2 years of these devices. So clearly, there is a lot of progress, and this is based on the fact that the wearables are better and better. They are less invasive. They are more comfortable. They are more sensitive in their measurement as well, which is enormously important. Not all challenges have been overcome. Some of the most intractable ones have to do with the material that needs to be soft, that needs to be adaptable, that needs to follow the curvature of the skin. And there has been a lot of progress in soft materials, whether these are nanomaterials or polymers. But at the end of the day, you need the semiconductor to be attached in most cases, and that is a rigid presence. So there is a challenge there from the material point of view. But I think a real paradigm shift will come with continuous assessment of one's health. And we're not there in that situation yet because our health systems are organized differently. But when this comes, wearables will be quite an important part of the equation. And in order for them to be that part of the equation, there has to be better integration of different types of data, starting with electronic health records, onto genomic data, onto imaging data, onto the wearable data. So it's only when this happens and there is an integration of data, we will see a paradigm shift and a much more prominent growth of wearables in the way that our health systems function.
So I want to get Ken's thoughts in a minute about what can encourage adoption. But before we get to that, you're talking about the increasing sensitivity of devices. You're talking about ongoing wellness and healthcare monitoring. An obvious question arises about privacy, data privacy. How do we protect all of this data that's being collected? Where do we stand on that? How are we as a panel feeling about the state of privacy protection when it comes to increasingly sophisticated wearables?
I had a really interesting observation. I think it was about 3 years ago. No, 4. And I was at this conference called CSUN. It's the largest and oldest assistive technology conference in the world. Happens in California. And at that time, companies on the forefront of 5G were on a panel where they talked about the trade-offs between higher connectivity and more highly customizable kind of technology versus, I guess, data concerns and privacy concerns as well. And for a lot of the people with disabilities in the audience, I guess the response was astoundingly clear, which was our privacy doesn't matter as much as having something that works for us. And that's the level it's gotten to. Not that privacy doesn't matter, but that's the state in which a lot of the technology that we built today doesn't flow through to that community as well. Yeah, so I thought I would share that.
Yeah. Paolo, how about you? What are you looking at these days when it comes to data privacy?
Well, this opens many other points that we could cover, and these are related to this coming, because wearable and bionics are icons of human-robot symbiosis, if you will, okay? So there is a functional part that we have already discussed, but then there is the future. And the future will be a society where many different devices, passive or able to sense or active, will be part of us. So, and the point is, how will we accept this? That could be an intrusion in our intimate life, if you will, because we are talking a lot about AI, it's fine. But this part of the story that is coming, that is the ubiquitous presence of robotic devices, including, as we said, wearable, even ingestible, connected to our body, sometimes even to the nervous system. The role of symbiosis, of cybernetics, we could say, is also again, we have to talk about the future. This is not going to be a far future, because bionic limbs are already here. Means limbs that are connected to our nervous system. They work. So what will be the impact of, let's say, intrusion in our privacy, and what will be the advantages, what will be the cost? So this is something I'm sure many in the audience would be interested in that, because obviously having a watch is not an issue, okay? But having something that could become part of your own body, even connected to your own mind, is certainly something that poses a number of very intriguing questions.
So last year at Davos, there was a speaker who talked about brain-computer interfaces, tracking brain waves and tracking our thoughts, and gave a scenario, which we as foresight experts recognize that tool, where an employee's brainwaves might be tracked, and suddenly you can see a romantic relationship that's happening between two employees. Obviously, an unintended side effect. So when it comes to these kinds of devices that are really intended for healthcare and wellness, what dialogues are happening right now around how to protect that data, but still enable those really unique healthcare benefits?
Well, thanks for raising this question, because well, there are medical devices among the ones we are talking about, and then there are consumer devices which also envisage a fairly extensive level of intrusion into our privacy. So that privacy, by all means, has to be protected. And you mentioned the growing market of consumer devices, which has to do with broadly understood cognitive enhancement. And we are at the very beginning of that wave. At the moment, they are relatively sort of soft devices, one could say, because of what technology can achieve. But there is concern already about people sharing information about their brain waves on the internet, right? And this is personal information about the functioning of the brain is personal information, so it has to be protected. So we don't have a framework for that. We are treating these consumer devices as consumer devices. Well, there is a time, and that time is now, to start thinking about a framework for these emerging neurotechnology-related devices, which will have an impact on our cognitive privacy or cognitive liberty. This debate is starting, but it's a super important one to have.
So Ken, I just want to come back to you before we move on to our next topic. I know that you've done a lot of thinking about the community test, which I'm hoping that you'll share with us. But as a part of that, can you tell us how are communities feeling about adoption of devices that maybe may infringe upon their privacy, and how do community feelings about that type of thing and those values affect whether or not these devices will ultimately scale?
I think before the privacy concerns come into the picture, it's very important to build trust. Without trust, it's very hard to try and prove to them that we will store their data well. And so with that, I think putting on more of a design lens in how we engage communities, in building that trust, in trying to test out the different technologies that are out there that we've built is key, right? And I think at a community scale, sometimes I do like to see it more as more of a widespread adoption, where things like wearables ideally would be less of equipment and more of lifestyle wearables, right? And I guess one interesting story I would share is in the world of wearables as well, there's this thing called the sign language glove, right? And it's something that we would ask a deaf person to wear a glove. It's being fitted with flexible sensors and stuff like that, and as well as iMute chips. And from there, they would sign, and then it would translate into text, right? From that description, it sounds like that's a good thing, right? And from an engineer's and technologist's mindset, it provides value. People should be using it. So that's from the engineering and technology standpoint. But if you were to take the design lens and try and engage with community to talk about adoption, what you would realize very, very soon after is that when you present this to the deaf community, it's immediately rejected because it's rejecting the sign language, which forms part of the deaf pride and identity, right? And if only more engineers and technologists would speak to communities that way, through that design lens, would they find it out, right? And this sign language glove example is interesting because over the last, I would say, 8 years, we've had at least 50 different identical projects across the world that's won multiple prizes from universities and different accelerator challenges, and no one seems to get the memo as well, right? So I think with adoption, it's always about really speaking to the community, and I do see that, from a community lens, it's sometimes more topical, it's more targeted, and that could help with adoption, and sometimes maybe that's what we have to do before we can really attempt the widespread adoption as well.
So Ken, let's start with you. You gave some really good examples of different communities or different areas that could benefit from wearables. What markets or areas do you think are at the forefront of growth, especially as we look beyond some of the wearables that we know today and we start thinking about these future form factors?
Before talking about future wearables, I think one of the most iconic wearables of the previous years is an exoskeleton, right? And you would see that in multiple industries being on the levels of doing sales pitch now, right? Seeing them out in the military battlefield, you'll see them in manufacturing floors, you see them in hospitals as well. Increasingly, I think that is also getting a little bit out of date because I think automation has really advanced to a level where it's not so much about augmenting a human anymore and more of just automating it with robots, right? So that's something that we have to consider as well. Yeah.
Paula, maybe we can go to you. We're talking a lot about wellness. You're doing a lot of work in the individual wellness space. Where do you think are the markets, especially for these types of devices?
I'd say the first market to start is already the working market, the factories. Companies are buying or services, logistics, everything in which a wearable system, active especially, or passive with a nice spring system. There are very, very smart solutions that have been devised, in any case, helping the worker to reduce the workload. By the way, this would also include in the work market an aging population or women. If this is needed, helping the workers to better address or tackle problems there is going to be to come. Second very important point is safety. We are not talking about that, but it's very important. I really believe, actually, we have a big project with a national agency in Italy to attack the problem of accidents at work by using many kind of sensors, in fact, or actuators. So this idea of helping workers to transform normal clothes, let's say, into intelligent, smart clothes, wearable, is something that's going to come. Then the second is healthcare. This is being said, and then wellness, for fitness or everything. It's another huge market, and frail elderly. The idea, exactly Pavel said, falls, very important. This kind of market, provided that, and we can discuss later, if you will, also with the audience, they are really acceptable. I think nobody would like to wear something unless, he's forced to do. That is not nice to wear. So this idea of acceptability, design of the right configuration, right material is very important, and cost, of course.
So healthcare keeps on coming up. Pavel, what role are wearables going to play in healthcare? I'm sure they're going to have to be a part of the overall ecosystem.
Yes, exactly. And I would like to maybe give an answer at the macro level rather than to zoom in at more specific examples. And these two macro level interventions, to my mind, have to do with the emergence of combination drugs. So drugs that will combine digital biomarkers, and here wearables will be an integral part of that solution. So that's the beginning of the journey, and then monitoring devices, and here wearables again are part of the solution at the end of the journey. So these combination drugs, I think, will be extremely big in healthcare to come. So that's one area. And the second area has to do with clinical trials, and there are already devices. Sony has a wearable device which is adapted to the needs of clinical trials. And here again, we need to cover the entire spectrum. So wearables can be important in signaling to the scientific team that there is an issue worth looking into. So that's the very beginning of the journey. Then they can be very impactful in patient stratification, in selecting the right patients for clinical trial, and that is, as I'm sure many of those of you who are involved know very well, this is a huge challenge. Many patients in clinical trials are misdiagnosed. In some trials, it's 1/3 or more of patients who are misdiagnosed. So here, wearables could be an important part of the solution. And then also monitoring patients at home. As part of the clinical trial and post-clinical trial procedure. So I wouldn't see wearables as, an isolated silver bullet that will solve everything by itself. It needs to be part of a broader approach to healthcare, and I think this is happening in a big way.
So looking forward, we're here to look into the future, to try to anticipate what might happen, to try to discuss what we ideally would like the future to look like. How could wearables be a multiplier for human activity, for human beings? Paolo, can we start with you?
This goes to one of the big questions, that is augmentation. I think that yes, wearable, especially exoskeletons, but in general, even ingestible, are a way of augmenting the normal human capabilities. But certainly, wearing something that is more powerful than us is very interesting. I like some kind of science fiction because they inspire. So consider the case of Dr. Octopus in Spider-Man. This is a clear case of a wearable device that is an augmentation device. And it's becoming a reality, actually. We already proposed years ago this idea of multiple arms. Actually, Kafka, in his Metamorphosis, wrote about a guy who is transformed in an insect, like a beetle. And the point is, how a cockroach actually, how our brain could control a body that is no longer the same. So there is an incredible amount of scientific challenges that we are addressing and will be addressed in the near future about neuroscience. So how a brain, actually there is a project just behind us, is about avatars. So the Japanese team, the JST team, is dreaming about one single human person who could control up to 20 or 50 avatars. So how could the brain control those multiple devices? So this is a frontier of certainly wearable in a broad sense, together with the big issue of the connection of those devices with the brain. That is another. And when you connect something to the brain, you open a gate to potentially anybody, or of course the doctors, it's fine, but also some other entities, let's say. So it is a kind of question that are obviously our responsibility as researchers, will be the responsibility of a research community that is growing, and of course industry in the near future.
So, Ken, talking about augmentation begs the question, how should we be approaching accessibility when we're thinking about designing wearable devices? And should we be looking for ways for these devices to help us surpass disabilities, or to what extent are they a part of our being?
Yeah, I think with a lot of the frontier technologies that are always put out, disability communities often wait for many years for it to trickle down to them, right? They're never top of mind when we're looking at these technologies. And that's where I try and always put across a debate to say we should be having the conversation up front and center. And the reason for that is because when we apply an inclusive design lens towards developing a lot of these technologies, essentially what we're doing is we're designing for people who are a part of the human lived condition, right? But who live slightly different lives from us. And whether or not that can allow us to actually glean in to see whether what they do differently or how they live differently can actually help augment or even I would say improve the neurotypical way of living, right? And so I think some examples that I could give you would be if you own a device, right, and you are kind of searching on Google or typing a text message, you might use something called autocomplete, right? And that actually is tremendously beneficial in allowing us to lead faster lives, right, in communication. But what you don't know is that that technology was first developed for people with upper limb extremities who could not type fast enough on a keyboard, right? And so because we looked at how to design for the extreme, we ended up designing for more, right? And that's something that we all enjoy now. So that's what I always try and encourage more people to do when they're looking at building new technologies. Let us look at the entire human spectrum. And that's going to allow us to uncover new innovations that are not yet as saturated as other sources of inspiration.
So, Pavel, can you talk to us then about this life cycle approach to technology, being included in wellness, and how wearables plays into that, and how will that improve our human experience?
Yeah, this follows very, very well from what Ken just said. And the life cycle approach, I think, will be largely enabled by wearables. The other solution would be that we would have a systemic change also in how healthcare is organized, and we would get to the life cycle approach. I think it's going to come through accessibility of wearables, among other things. And it's more and more obvious that we need to start to diagnose earlier, and we need to start to prevent disorders much earlier. So even heart attacks can now be traced to cholesterol levels going wrong in your adolescence. So it's never too early to start, right? And wearables are an unbeatable way to address that problem. Of course, there will be many sensitive areas, and here I want to refer to what Paolo mentioned about the brain, because the technology to read from the brain and write into the brain is improving. One should not sort of share any scare stories here about being able to read one's thoughts. That's definitely not on the cards as we speak. But there are technologies based on stimulation, transcranial stimulation, so there's transcranial direct stimulation and alternating stimulation that have an impact on the plasticity of the brain, and this can help in improving cognitive impairments, for example. It can help people to memorize things better, to learn, and this is of course hugely impactful in making us better humans. But of course there is a line which a foresight community like the one gathered in this beautiful museum needs to take into account, namely, what if someone tries to abuse these advances for other purposes? I think we have to be prepared for that, and there is a lot of work. So OECD started work on responsible innovation in neurotechnology with a set of guidelines adopted in 2019. Now UNESCO is developing a code in the area. So there is a lot of activity, but we have to look at the possible scenarios in a very attentive fashion.
So we've talked about wearables being able to improve our experiences, help us overcome disabilities. But the question that everybody came here to hear your answers to is, will wearables give us some kind of sixth sense as a human? So Ken, maybe we can start with you.
So I think the original sixth sense that we don't recognize as much as the other five is our vestibular sense, right? The liquid in our inner ear that allows us to kind of make sense of our spatial environment as well as our orientation. So that's the original one. I would say that whenever there's conversation about sixth sense, it's almost being painted with a very broad generalization, right? I mean, yes, there are things that help us to augment the way we live, but in order to classify it as a sixth sense seems a bit of a stretch. But I would say that when we look towards things like communication, socializing, and making sense of the world around us, sometimes our bodies don't inform us as richly as we would like them to. And I think with a lot of the wearables that we are developing today, maybe that might help. But still, to call it a sixth sense, not very sure about that yet.
Pavel, when we think about things like precision medicine, I can imagine that wearables are going to up our game and make it even more effective. What might we see in that space?
Yes, precision medicine is a promise awaiting for its time. And I think wearables are uniquely placed to contribute to the delivery of precision medicine together with AI, needless to say. And we talked a lot about exoskeletons and neurorehabilitation. Well, what this would mean through the precision medicine angle is that someone comes in with a mobility impairment, and you are able to scan what is the exact nature of the problem, and you are able to choose a solution which is tailor-made to that person. So this is beginning to happen in neuro rehabilitation as well. So Kyogo exoskeletons, which help with the mobility around the knee, or MyoSuit active orthosis. And Dario is in the room, and he was part of the team that came up with this active orthosis to really enable intensive training of strength. Well, these are types of solutions which can be adjusted to individual needs. But if I can return to the sixth sense, I think for me the sixth sense is really about our ability to control our future. And here wearables can provide a helping hand. I mean, think of diabetes especially. I mean, some people would say it's either diabetes controlling you or it's you controlling diabetes. And for me, the sixth sense, slightly differently from, I guess, the way it was perceived when the panel was planned. For me, it's really about sort of regaining our ability to control our destiny in a meaningful way. Not a silver bullet, surely part of the solution, but a very impactful one.
So, Paolo, I'm gonna nerd out for a second when I rephrase this question for you. There's a Star Trek. Any Star Trek fans in the audience? Okay, a couple. Good. There's a Star Trek episode where Picard and Beverly, who's the doctor, get these transmitters put in the back of their neck, and as a result, the more time they spend together, they can feel what each other is feeling. So if Beverly is scared, Picard feels fear. That's what I think of when I think of a sixth sense from wearables. You've talked a lot about augmentation, about implantables or ingestible devices. Am I ever going to be able to feel if you're scared?
I'm not scared, but this is this is, let's say, very reasonable. You know, when I started working in the area of bionic limbs, that is 40 years ago, I was inspired by many cases, you know, but also by Star Wars. You know, in Star Wars, those of you who like Star Wars,
Star Trek. Oh no.
No, Star Trek, Star Wars. You will remember the operation, you know, from a robot connecting nerves in the hand, and well, this was science fiction at that time. It's true now. So 40 years of international, I would say, consistent research going and leading to this. Today, there are also in my institute in Italy, but there are some examples of cases in which really an amputee can feel the hardness or the, let's say, temperature of an object, not only grasp, but also feel. So my answer is yes. Not only that, you know, for example, at a PFL, Grégoire Courtin and co-workers have been able to do something even more science fiction, that is making paralyzed people to walk again by stimulation, by injecting through electrodes proper signal, and to make, you know, you can go on everywhere, YouTube, but of course a very solid scientific research. So today, the connection between the external world and the nervous system is doable. And we open the gate, let's say the door, to a new field, that is the field of cyborgs, in a way. Not only wearable, but cyborg. That is, we are becoming maybe partly humans and partly artificial. And obviously, we are connecting with the external world, with the internet, with AI. So AI is not only in the computers, okay, or in our tablets or whatever, but will come very close to us. And so the question is how to deal with that. And this is maybe the next question. I have an answer. Pavel has an answer that is very close, that is the role of education of people. I'm really fighting because those of us who work in this field have a different kind of education because you must address not only engineering problems, but these kind of problems. And in my opinion, there are no rules that are enough. There was a meeting just before talking about that, regulation or education. I am for education.
Thank you so much. So we're getting to that time. We have an audience here of people who are from various different industries and sectors and functional areas. Any final thoughts that you want to leave with our audience today so that they can go out and start to work towards this future as well?
It's a single message. It's education, especially for engineers, but because we need education. I'm an engineer, but not only engineers, of course.
Pavel, how about you?
I would say that the wearables are our probably most intimate mirror. We contain thousands, if not millions, of data points in every centimeter of our skin. The sensors, the receptors, just think about that. All this is being picked up by wearables. It's a wealth of data and knowledge about ourselves. This has to be used responsibly, and this has to be used with care.
Thank you. Ken, final thoughts?
Yeah, and for me, on my accessibility spiel, I think, if you're building new technology, always look wider than just the neurotypical demographic that you're looking to design for. And I promise you, you will find certain insights within there that will make for a much richer experience as well.
Well, thank you to all of you for coming. I hope that we broadened your perspective a little bit today on wearable devices and bionic beings. And thank you so much to our distinguished speakers for your insights as well.
Thank you. Thank you. That was great.